Well, welcome everyone. Today is the 22nd of November, and this is our full council meeting. If you would stand as you're able to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. I am aware of two council members that are not here presently. Mr. Van Harn is sick. I would request that when it's the appropriate time that we vote to excuse Mr. Van Harn. I'm also aware that Councilman Fredenoff, REA, is on his way here. There was a car accident on the highway, so he's hoping to be here within the next half hour or so. All right. With that said, I'm going to be asking for this to be approved with the agenda, that we move any registered speakers back to the section when we'll be discussing legislation, not at the very beginning, as we typically do. I'll also be enforcing a strict 3-minute limit on any comments that are to be made at that time. With that, can we have a call for quorum here?
Yes. Mr. Betcher? Here. Ms. Chaney?
Here.
Mr. Kmet?
Here.
Ms. Pridnoff? Ms. Snyder?
Here.
And Mr. Van Harn is not present.
Okay. Do we have a motion for excuse of both Mr. Van Harn and Mr. Pridnoff?
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I take that as unanimous. Thank you. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at the agenda? And if so, with the modifications that I requested, are we willing to adopt that? Is there such a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. I take that as unanimous. I have two individuals that are registered to speak this evening, Rabbi A.D. Mutson and Jen Scott, both concerning the non-discrimination ordinance. As I said, I'll be enforcing a 3-minute time limit per speaker on that, and we'll be holding off on those comments until we get to the legislation section of our meeting tonight. Are there any other individuals that are registered to speak?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Minutes to be approved. These are the minutes from November 8th, 2021. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at them? Are there any amendments to them? Do we have a motion to accept?
Motion to accept.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Take that as unanimous. Thank you. And we'll get on to our reports. As I said, Councilman Van Harn isn't here. He expresses his regrets about not being able to be here this evening. He has tested positive for COVID-19 and is in quarantine. He says he's doing okay. Even that being the case, I'm sure he would appreciate prayers for full recovery. Mr. Van Harn was going to provide an update on his work with the Little Miami Fire District toward publishing a joint statement that's going to be delayed a little bit, which is understandable. For anyone unaware of this, the Village Fire Service will be switching from LMFD to Deer Park Silverton in the new year, and we'll have a more detailed statement about that coming soon. Roger's working on it. We'll review it with council before we make a more detailed public statement. I had the honor of being asked to speak to the senior class at Cincinnati Waldorf High School on the topic of civics and involvement in local government. I want to thank Ms. Lydia Kelly, who teaches civics and government there, for that invite, and the senior class of 2022 for all their awesome questions and passion for engagement and democracy. I spoke there last Thursday about my experience in various roles I've played in government, answered questions, and encouraged folks to get involved, emphasizing that often just showing up to be involved in local council, committee, and commission conversations can have a big impact. I also reached out last week to our representative of Cincinnati Water Works, who deals with lead pipe replacement projects in our area. This is a topic I researched back when the Flint lead water crisis was in the news. National spotlight of that led to many municipalities looking at their own lead infrastructure and completing replacement efforts, at least on the public side. On the private side, many residences built prior to 1974 still have lead pipes in them. Cincinnati Water Works has a program to help residents get 40% of the replacement costs covered, up to $1,500, We have about 22 structures that have lead on the private side. 3 to 4 are businesses and the rest are residences. Back when I first suggested looking at how to help our residents and business owners connect to these resources, the cost of replacement averaged around $5,500. So with the assistance, the balance typically owed was about $4,000. I had asked council at the time to consider how we might provide additional financial assistance to make a lead-free Golf Manor, but we didn't have the ability to do it. Very thankful to say that we may now be in a place where we're able to provide that assistance. As I mentioned, I reviewed my notes from like 5 years ago on this topic and talked with the representative at Cincinnati Waterworks, brought all that information to the administration. That $1,500 assistance per household from Greater Cincinnati Waterworks is still in play, but the average cost of replacement has declined from $5,000. Ron will share, Mr. Hirth, our village administrator, will share more on the details of this report about how this might work. I'm very happy that we may be able to do this for our residents. Most first-tier suburbs in the world are still dealing with terrible lead problems, and I'm very happy to see the possibility of soon being able to say that our village isn't one of them. And I want to thank the administration for their efforts on this. Want to acknowledge that one of the new CPS board members grew up here in Golf Manor. Mary Weinberg successfully won a seat with the Cincinnati Public School Board. She canvassed in Golf Manor and stopped by my house, and I had no idea she was a gold medal Olympian. Right. She won a gold medal in the quarter mile, which I ran and was quite good at in high school. I never made it past Columbus, though, and she did. So anyway, I was telling Ron, I think this is Chuck Harmon worthy. Not very many communities can claim to be the childhood home of an Olympian, and I think we should start looking at how we might better brag a little bit about Miss Weinberg. I don't know if that's a statue or a street or a better idea. I'm open to ideas, so bring them on. As you know, I've been asking for nominations for our Human Rights Commission. Anybody can make a nomination. Nominees have to fill out an application that's on our website. Mr. Hirth and I have spoken to a number of individuals interested in serving the community in this way. There are several more that have expressed interest that we'll be talking to. I know I'm not alone in saying I'd like council to be prepared to vote on the commission placement by the end of the year. The voters overwhelmingly supported the creation of this commission more than a year ago. It's time to move on it. So I'd ask for council to set a date. And please, if you know someone interested who has not yet completed an application, direct them to do so and begin practicing your voice of support for those nominations that you like. All right. 2 final mentions. One is on the death of Sharon Lee Throckmorton. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She was a long-term resident here here in the village, was very involved, particularly with the Firefighters Wives Association.
Well, her husband was a volunteer firefighter from
Good.
1976 to 94. I think.
Right.
That's what Lee told me.
I am going to I'm going to ask Ms. Cheney to speak to this to give it the proper honor that it deserves, because she personally knew Sharon.
I worked with her too on the fire department ladies auxiliary, which was established to support our Golf Manor Fire Department, especially when it was volunteer. They held events to raise money to purchase items for the fire department. And at the annual dinner that the fire department had every year, which wasn't paid out of taxpayer money, it was the firefighters had their own club. And they had 2 fish fries every year to earn money to put into that. So at the end of the year, they would celebrate. And then the ladies auxiliary would present them with an item that they so needed that Golf Manor couldn't afford. So the 3 years that I worked on ladies auxiliary, and my sister was also a member, we were able to buy helmets for them and boots. This is 1 year, helmets 1 year, boots 1 year, and then we got them those red coveralls for the runs that they made for paramedic and all. And so they moved away quite a long time ago, but they served the village very well.
The memorial service is Tuesday, tomorrow, at 11 a.m. at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. I have the address and the instructions for if you want to send flowers. The village will be sending flowers. If you'd like that information, I have that here. I can get it to you. Right. And some good news. Some of you may have seen the signs around Gulf Manor asking for prayers for MJ, an 8-year-old who was caught in crossfire of a shootout in Westwood this past June. Well, Marcellus returned home here in Gulf Manor this past week, is being cared for by long-term resident Ruby Bean. I know the full community is very happy for this news, and they should feel the whole support of our community and our prayers being answered in this way. So thank you, everyone who prayed, and our best wishes to the family. And that's it for my report, Mr. Hurth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I want to thank everybody for being here this evening, and you are observing our COVID protocols this evening, which have continued throughout the pandemic. And we are continuing to service our residents at the doors and triage issues there. And this will continue until orders from Hamilton County Public Health and from the state change. So again, thank you very much. We appreciate you wearing masks tonight. Quick note on the Vera Road project. I was out in the field with the engineers last week, and I'm still waiting for an update on timing. What we believe is going to happen, those couple of weeks there where we had rain and then this rain this last weekend, unfortunately saturates things that makes it difficult to continue doing some of the pieces that need to be done to get to the point of putting down the first surface of asphalt. The curbs on the southern side of Vera are pretty much done, as is the curb on Short Elbrook. On the eastern side, Fair Oaks continues to be worked on from Lisanville to Vera. What we're expecting will happen is if the weather holds and doesn't turn really, really cold, they should be able to get to the first course of concrete prior to the bad weather. So that's what we got our fingers crossed for. We're hoping that gets done. Likely that project will not completely finish with the final top coating of asphalt until spring of 2022, which could be anywhere February, March, just depends on what the weather does. Asphalt does not do well in cold weather, and we certainly want to make sure that that surface has as much integrity as we can possibly get from it. There had been discussion in council a couple of times this past year about the walking path that runs from Lisanville Avenue to Farm Acres Drive in Amberley. And some of the residents on Vera had requested looking into doing a raised crosswalk at the walking path, which would go from the southern side of Vera to the northern side. The first pass by the road engineer back in the summer was that it was not feasible. We had some other things we wanted to take a look at over on the road, and we confirmed that because of the drainage on Vera Avenue and the way that a raised crosswalk has to be built, we would essentially be creating a dam in the middle of the street with no place for the water to go, particularly flowing down from Fair Oaks. What we've decided is that there will be a comprehensive renovation of the curb. And I sent this to council earlier today, but I'll show this. This shows, if you can see, the northern side of Vera, the southern side of Vera. What we're going to do is renovate the stairs that go from Vera Avenue back into the corporation line. That'll be a ramp that is navigatable, so people don't have to carry their strollers up and down that anymore. We will do a piano key crosswalk across there, which will be painted on the pavement with thermal striping. There will be curb cuts on both sides of the curb with the ramps. If you've seen the ramps around the village that have the red dots in them, those will be placed there also. To continue that project, we're also going to do a similar treatment in the service drive. And then on Lisanville, which is not on here, When the Lasanaville Road project was done, we apparently missed the crosswalk there from Hamel to the path. That's going to get repainted also with the piano keys. And we're also going to put up appropriate no parking and crosswalk signage in all of these areas. So that should make this certainly an area that people can see that there is a crosswalk and improve safety for anybody who's using that. The one downside on this is we will lose a couple of parking spaces because it will be no parking on either side of the crosswalk, as is our standard policy throughout crosswalks in the village. Questions on that? There will be some additional expense to that, but that'll be covered by the road levy. And it just makes sense to do this while the concrete work is being done and everything's torn up there at that time.
I want to thank Mr. Prednoff for his work on this. I know that getting the crosswalk in place was a significant concern of his. A lot of folks in the community who are traveling to synagogue cross from that northern section down to move south into the village, and it can be a dangerous intersection. So I know that he spent a lot of time advocating for some improvements to that area. So I'm thankful for that, and to the administration.
The final thing I'd report on that project is that there will be 3 speed humps that are on Vera proper. Chief Campbell's going to determine the location of those based on traffic patterns. And we also made the decision to install a couple of half road humps back in the service drive. Once that gets fixed, that's going to be a nice, smooth, plain surface back there. So it'll be there to remind people, don't speed. That's what's happening with Vera. Leaf collection continues. We are weekly, the service crew is weekly focusing on the schedule that's available on our website. I want to point out, though, that if there are no leaves that are on those streets, those are the priority streets, they continue to go around the village and look for leaves. So it's not like we're just doing those streets and then we wait until more leaves fall down and go back out. They are constantly out 5 days a week, 8-hour shifts throughout the leafing season. Want to remind everybody that an alternative to having the village pick up the leaves at the curb is to bag your leaves. And Rumpke is doing recycling pickups on Monday of yard waste that's in paper bags. Unfortunately, still no new news on the playground project. We are waiting from the vendor to give us an idea of when the materials will come in or be available to fabricate the new playground structure. I can report, though, which I didn't say in finance this evening, that we have successfully requested reimbursement, which $50,000 of COVID funding is helping to pay for that project. And we got that in time to get paid during this fiscal year. So hopefully next time we talk, we will have received it. The strategic plan that council is working on is comprised of several sessions that are working sessions of council, where the council members are talking about long-term visions for the village, including near-term projects and places we would like to take the village in the next 5 to 10 years. We had a second meeting scheduled for last Thursday, which we needed to postpone. And what I'm looking for at this point is to try and accomplish this before we get to December 13th. So we have the week of November 29th, which would be the 29th, 30th, 1st, and 2nd of December. And then the week after that would be December 6th through the 9th. So I've not received any information yet back from the consultant who's helping us with this task. Are there any, probably the best thing to do is if you have any specific days in that time period that absolutely don't work, would you let me know? Shoot me a quick email. It was November 29th and 30th, December 1st and 2nd, and then December 6th through the 9th.
Hanukkah is the 28th through the 6th. Just a heads up.
Okay, so it looks like we're looking then at the 7th, 8th, or 9th. So that narrows it down.
Really?
Okay.
You guys go ahead. Just, I don't think, coming into the holidays, you're not gonna find a good time, so.
Okay, well, we'll continue to work on that. We don't need to make that decision here this evening. And then at some point, Mr. Donald, when it's appropriate, I'm going to be asking for an executive session to talk about matters of compensation for a public official or an employee.
We can just do that at the end of the meeting and then come back in anticipating additional legislation.
Okay? And that's the end of my report unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hirth. Any other questions? All right. Mr. Lanzer, fiscal officer.
Yeah.
Report.
Yeah, so I'll start with the October 21 financial packet, which is what I'm sure everyone's here interested in tonight. Bad joke. For the month of October, fiscal year 21, the village had an adjusted bank balance of $3.3 million. Of this amount, $3.2 million can be found in the village's primary checking account. And the remaining balances rest in several law enforcement related accounts. I always like to reiterate that the vast majority of the balance found in the village's primary checking account is actually fund accounted to dedicated purpose road and street funds, and those funds can only be used for those purposes. For the month, the village had 84 payments clear the bank, totaling $627,000. As for the general fund, the village had spent $237,000. This figure was $66,000 more than what the village spent during October of last year. And for the year, the village has spent approximately $1.8 million of general fund appropriations, approximately 84% of what's been made available. So the amount is significantly more than what the village spent through October of last year. Some of this increase has been anticipated and planned for and budgeted for due to increased expenses and employee costs. However, there has been increased overtime this year due to staffing challenges, particularly in the police department, and a series of projects, one-off projects that required significant timely payments. I went over at finance, but an example of a significant project is we replaced the roof of the firehouse this year. That was unplanned for, we didn't know. Again, I want to reiterate the village administration has continued to monitor expenses and has implemented several expense controls throughout this year. The largest source of expense for the month of October was Adlita, which is the contractor that the village hired to do the Vera Road project. We made 2 payments to them in October. Payroll, of course, and payroll in October was a three pay period month. DWA Recreation, which is the company that the village is purchasing our brand new playground equipment with that Rob mentioned earlier. Jefferson Health Plan, which is the provider of the employee health insurance, and the Ohio Police Fire Pension. As for general fund revenues, the village generated $135,000 in total this month. This number was nearly identical to what the village generated in October of last year. However, for the year, total general fund revenues stand at $1.9 million. This figure is $126,000 more than what the village generated through October of last year. So I think that's good news. The primary cause for the increase in revenues this year have been due to increases in income tax receipts. For the month, the village generated $107,000 in general fund income taxes, and this is $45,000 more than what the village generated in income tax receipts in October of last year. For the year, income tax revenues are $807,000, nearly $95,000 more than what the village was able to generate through October of last year. So the village is on track to meet and exceed both forecasted total general fund revenues and in particular income tax revenues. That's the end of my report. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone on council has.
Thank you, Mr. Lanzer. Any questions? Everyone still awake?
Yeah. Exciting stuff.
And the motion to accept the financial report for October 2021.
Yes, please. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Chief Campbell.
I got one other significant thing here. Thought you were jumping. I know, Chief Campbell's. Hold on. Tonight, we are approving the appropriations for next year. It'll look similar to earlier this year when we passed the tax budget. That's the appropriations for next year, fiscal year 2022. It's part of the ORC and is required by the county and state auditor each year for the village to submit appropriations for the following year. Again, the appropriation budget looks similar to the previously passed tax budget from earlier this year in both form and substance. And as you may or may not be aware, the appropriation budget estimates revenues and sets appropriation levels for every village fund. When compared to the tax budget passed from earlier this year, there's been several modifications. Modifications are due to several factors, which include adjustments to benefits, staffing levels, employee compensation, contract arrangements and projects that were either added since the approval of the tax budget or adjusted in some way since their approval. I mentioned it earlier, Rumpke, we have a new Rumpke contract this year. That was, the rates were approved after we passed the tax budget, so that's one of the changes you'll see. Another example is employee health insurance. Again, we have a new carrier that went in after the tax budget was approved, so some of those numbers had to change as well. As for village revenues, the village is forecasting total general fund revenues of $2.7 million. Village administration is forecasting receipts of $690,000 in real estate property taxes and $860,000 for income taxes. The $860,000 figure is a slight increase from what was originally forecast in the fiscal year 2022 budget. Now, I made this increase after carefully reviewing historic income tax receipts as well as actual receipts thus far this year. This year, we're projecting to be in the $900,000 range, maybe more. So I don't believe that we will hit that mark next year, given what's happening, the adjustment in fire and EMS service. But I still believe I'm being somewhat conservative at the $860,000 level. Let's see, where am I? The other noticeable item on the general fund revenue side is $562,000 forecasted under intergovernmental. This is $550,000 more than what was forecasted to be received this year. Again, this is due to the intricacies of financing the new fire and EMS service under the existing levy, where those revenues will be passed through to us from the Little Miami Joint Fire and Rescue District, and we will account for them in the general fund for next year. As for appropriations, the meat and potatoes here, the village is forecasting expenses in the general fund to be $2.7 million. This figure is an increase in appropriations of nearly $600,000 or 28%. Again, this shouldn't alarm anybody since the cost of fire and EMS services will become a general fund expense next year. As for other departmental appropriations, the largest area of expense will be the police department, which is typical for the village of Gulf Manor on any given year. Total expense for the police department will be $1.1 million and represents 41% of total appropriations. Administration, total expense will be $299,000 and represent 11% of appropriations. The clerk's office appropriations will be 7%. And lands and buildings, which is our service department, will be 5% of total general fund appropriations. The other line item I'd like to draw everyone's attention to, if I can go back to the general, the first page, is capital outlay. The village is in need of replacing the cooling system for this building. And the village, we received a quoted cost of that in the realm of $55,000. So That expense will be accounted for in $67,000 capital appropriations. The appropriations cited above will result in a positive balance of approximately $10,000, which will grow the general fund carryover reserve to $889,000 to begin fiscal year 23. I'd just like to say where the village was a few years ago to where we are now, we are in a much better financial position, a much healthier financial position. And I take particular pride in it. I hope council does as well. Careful leadership here. The rest of the appropriations for each village fund are fairly straightforward and typical for a given year with one exception. Road resurfacing and reconstruction continues to be a priority for the village, and that continues significantly next year, where the village is planning to complete 3 separate road projects next year. As a result, the village will plan to appropriate $810,000 for road reconstructions in the village next year. This is due to financing requirements. The village is required to outlay half the cost of the Weehee project at one time, somewhat different than how we've financed other road projects. Fortunately, though, the village has significant resources available in this levy and in this fund, and that expense can be easily absorbed. So that's the end of my report about the appropriations budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone on council might have.
Thank you, Mr. Lancer. There are no other questions. I'll ask.
Motion to approve the reconciliations budget.
Yes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Without objection, I take that as unanimous.
So if I might say, I'm very proud of our financial team. Ms. Bergen, who's our new financial operations manager and village clerk, Mr. Lanzer, who's been our fiscal officer for the past, going on 3 years now. When we first started this journey in 2014, the village was $200,000 in the hole. We were positioned to be taken over by the state, and we've continued to learn how to control expenses better. We've learned how to better negotiate contracts. We've learned how to be efficient in our spending. And one of the best moves we made was moving income tax collection to the Regional Income Tax Authority, because that income is growing because they are finding people who did not pay taxes to the village who should have been. So this has all been a positive result, which has helped us continue to grow our income. We're not done. We need to work on revenue and getting our business district back together, and that'll be through economic development, and that's going to be one of the major things that we focus on in 2022. So again, I applaud our financial team, and we're proud. We're very proud that we've been able to sustain this. So this isn't a fluke. This is a real thing now. So
Here. Chief Campbell.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. I've prepared the activity report for the month of October. Just whenever you have a copy, I circulated one with members of council also. For the month of October, police department responded to 245 calls for service. Those 245 calls generated 13 criminal offense reports. If there's any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer. Okay. Next thing I want to make council aware of, as soon as I can unlock my phone, is on December 11th, the Gulf Manor Police Department is doing Gulf Manor Police Department Shop with Humps and canines. There'll be other agencies that participate in that as well. We had a great event last year. Sergeant Reed and Lieutenant Forrest do a great job organizing that. We already have officers volunteered for it. I'll report back to council after that event next month. And that is all I have, because I know you guys have a full plate ahead of you.
Thank you, Chief Campbell. Any questions? All right. I'm not skipping anything. reading that correctly, Mr. Solicitor? Mr.
Thank
Donlin?
you. The first item we have tonight on the legislative agenda is ordinance 2021-11, which was tabled from our last meeting. So first, I need a motion to remove from the table.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Then process-wise, we put it on the table and have discussion, comment, and then the vote. So this is the third reading of ordinance 2021-11, an ordinance amending sections of ordinance 2019-10, an ordinance to combat discrimination and for the guarantee of equality and inclusion. I need a motion and a second for approval of third reading.
Motion to approve.
Second.
And then we'll do a roll call vote after discussion. I sent council, when we last were here, there was some question about getting some additional language and reviewing that additional language as potential modification to the ordinance. And I sent you kind of a summary of that, but for the benefit of those in the audience, I'll go through some of those comments here. Ironically, it's about a year ago that the Board of Elections reported to us that the voters overwhelmingly approved or reaffirmed the non-discrimination ordinance which was passed. What happened after that was we decided to reach out to see if there's ways of strengthening that ordinance, going through some of the details of the ordinance and seeing, can we strengthen it? We weren't changing the ordinance. We weren't rewriting the ordinance. We were not redebating the ordinance. We were simply trying to figure out if we could strengthen the ordinance. So there was some meetings, and we went through those meetings with discussions about how do we address some of these issues. One of the issues that was raised was, can we put a cap on the damages? The ordinance itself said $500 a day, each day is a separate offense, and there was concern that this could accumulate to an unlimited amount of money. The other was just recognizing that since we started down this path, the Supreme Court ruled specifically on employment exemptions with Our Lady of Guadalupe case, and specifically stated that religious organizations are exempt from many of the employment laws. And although we had the exemption in our ordinance, and although we had the general exemption in our ordinance, we thought it best just to affirmatively state that we are subject to the rulings of Our Lady of Guadalupe relative to employment discrimination. What that left us with was the section on public accommodation, which has been what this matter has been back and forth on. And we looked at the ordinance and the ordinance which had been approved. In the definition section, we spelled out a specific exemption on public accommodation. We had the same language, and that's what I pointed out to you in the memo, in the special section on public accommodation. What we heard during the discussion was a concern that, well, wait a minute, if we engage in a commercial activity one time, do we forever lose that cloak of protection? And we kept saying, no, you don't. If you have a bake sale, it's a commercial activity, it's open to the public for that event, we want no discrimination. But you don't lose your protection in every other event. So what we try to do is try to clarify that in that exemption. And that's the language we brought in, was to say it is not an act of discrimination for. And again, what I gave to council was the language from the definition, the language from the special exemption, now the language is proposed is identical. And so what we try to do is advance that to clean it up. So what was proposed to us in the alternate language were two choices. One was to eliminate the exemption in its entirety, strike it completely from the ordinance. The other was to add some language to it, exempting all religious organizations from this section of the ordinance. Addressing the first one, we're being asked to take out language that was in there twice, language that was affirmed in the ordinance that went to the ballot box. And it made no sense. And I've said that before. It made no sense to remove that exemption. We have an exemption under education. We have an exemption under employment. We have an exemption under housing. Why not have a special exemption recognizing that section of public accommodation? We also have the umbrella exemption. It made no sense to have the exemption spelled out in all the other three sections and leave this gaping hole. That will raise the question of why did you have a hole? And given the fact that that language had been approved, we decided let's leave it in there. That's what's on the table, is to leave it in there. The alternate language was exempt all religious organizations from this section on public accommodation. That revisits the debate that we've had, the decisions we've made, everything we went through last year on giving this broader exemption. It's up to council if you want to reopen that debate. It's up to council if you want to go down that path and suddenly take public accommodations completely out of it. We've heard a lot about what impact this is going to have and concerns it's going to have. And we've tried to calm those fears by saying, look, we need to get started. We're going to have a commission. The commission's first role is to determine whether or not a discriminatory act has occurred and then try to reconcile it. If it can't be reconciled, then move it on to a hearing stage. So we've built multiple protections in there not to create litigation, not to create civil penalties, not necessarily create criminal action, but to get the show on the road and talk to people and try and figure it out. But something I pointed out to all of you in that memo, something that's never been challenged, never been changed, is the intent section of our ordinance. And anytime our ordinance would be enforced, anytime our ordinance would be questioned, anytime our ordinance would be interpreted, somebody's going to look back to what was the intention. It states, the intent of this ordinance is not to penalize any religious organization nor religious institution from exercising its constitutionally protected rights, nor to burden any religious organization or religious institution in exercising those rights. But the purpose of this ordinance is to recognize that persons with different sexual orientation or gender identity or expression should also enjoy certain rights which are equally protected to all persons by the Constitution. So, if we get a case and there's a question, that commission needs to reference this. Is it an unnecessary burden? Is it imposing on religious freedoms? We obviously can't sit here on Weehee Road and trump the Constitution of the United States. But I cannot sit here and speculate to the multiple occasions where would it apply there? Would it apply there? I don't know. If nobody discriminates, we're going to have a real boring commission because they won't be meeting. Boring. If someone does discriminate and we get a complaint, we have a forum within which to address the complaint, first by conciliation, but always recognizing the balancing act that we need to have. I can't write it to accommodate every possible concern. And again, what is written and what is before you is what was approved by the voters. And that is a specific exemption in the area of public accommodation. No one's ever questioned the cap on damages. No one's ever questioned the language we put in there on employment. It's only this public accommodation, and that language, first, which is proposed to be excluded in the amendment, has been reaffirmed by the voters. And secondly, the concept of exempt religious organizations is something we debated, we decided, it went to the voters, and here we are. So that's kind of the context of my long memo, folks, that I wrote.
Before we move to the registered speakers, any questions? I understand that we have two registered speakers. I see Rabbi Munson. Would you, I mentioned earlier that we're enforcing a 3-minute limit for registered speakers. Would you state your address, organization, introduce yourself? Thank you.
Sure. A.D. Munson, 2179 Bluegrass. So thank you to the mayor and the administrator actually for giving us this opportunity because too often we focus on our differences, and that might happen tonight. But it's important to highlight that the reason we're here tonight is because the leaders of this village try to come together after a contentious referendum. A lot of parts of my speech, the solicitor stole some of my background and
Well, you
history
can
here.
say you just agree with him and sit down.
That would be easier, wouldn't it?
Okay.
But a few things that were said, I think the last council meeting I wasn't there, I watched on video, I think do need clarification. So there was a discussion about delay. Let me just say that the religious institutions do not want this dragging on. This has put them in limbo for the last 2 years, and no one wants to get this over with more than me. I don't get paid for this. I left the wedding celebration to be here tonight. My wife's not happy about that. All of us in the Jewish community live, work, worship, and or educate our children here in Gulf Manor. We aren't leaving. We spent hundreds of hours trying to find that language that would allow us to continue living the way we have for the last 75 years in peace with our neighbors, keeping Gulf Manor the welcoming place it's always been. Unfortunately, parts of the ordinance seem to be preventing that from happening. And that, as the solicitor said, that's what led the mayor and the administrator to have that conversation with Councilman Pridenoff. I wasn't part of those conversations, but I understood that they recognized that although a majority of voters voted in favor of the ordinance, there was a strong minority who were uncomfortable perhaps with at least parts of it. The no side, I think, got more votes than any person sitting currently on council. More importantly, there was this discussion. They were shocked to discover that the religious organizations, based on their legal counsel, stopped allowing their facilities to be allowed to be used. They were the only kosher facilities in the village, part of because of the reason that the solicitor just mentioned. But more importantly, the difference of understanding the ordinance language. And that's what took those meetings throughout the last few months. I'm not responsible. I don't know why it wasn't brought to council until October, but as we said a few months ago, the message back was that we are in agreement in 4 of the 5 issues. And the one outstanding issue was this question, whether or not it was a legal question from the memo. Is it better and stronger of an exemption for the organizations? Do they have more legal protection with no exemption? Or do they have less or more? That's a question. Do they have less rights or more strength in their protection if we remove that language? I will let Councilman Pridenoff address the details because I only got 3 minutes. But all I ask that you listen with an open mind. I think that, well, it's true the solicitor can't possibly answer every single possible permutation. On the other hand, knowing what we are passing tonight, and if you decide as council to do so out of knowledge of what you're doing, or at least what some in our community believe the implications of what it is. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Munson.
Yeah.
Jen Scott, would you state your address and association, please?
Jen Scott, 370 South 5th Street in Columbus, Quality, Ohio. Pleasure to be back in Gulf Manor. My name's Jen Scott. I share her pronouns, and I'm proud to have supported Gulf Manor for the past 2 years as you worked on this non-discrimination ordinance, or an NDO. I urge you to pass ordinance 2021-11 and to not alter the ordinance by either eliminating the religious exemptions entirely or adding a new language offered by Rabbi Monson, which is an attempt to remove religious entities from the public accommodation section. I won't go through the timeline as Mr. Donaldson already did that, but I will say it was 2 years ago. The day before I joined Equality Ohio officially was my meeting here. We've been working on this the entire time. I foolishly showed up thinking we were going to have an hour-long meeting. We were here till well past 10. And one of the things I admire about this council is the detail with which you listen to all those deliberations and specifically chose the wording that went into this ordinance. And the voters agreed. Last year, 1,377 people said yes to keeping this ordinance in place as written. That's a 74% support rate. The people of Gulf Manor want these protections in place. Throughout this year, the mayor, members of council, and Mr. Donaldson have discussed with the local Orthodox Jewish community to address their concerns and clarify the language, but not change the meaning of the language that the council and the voters have approved. It's come to our attention that they've proposed, again, to strike the religious exemption in section 4B of the original ordinance, or to replace such language with an exemption that would exempt religious organizations from public accommodations. First, we reiterate our confusion as to why a religious entity would want to see the original exemption, which was put in place for the benefit of religious communities, to be removed. We support religious protections in local ordinances that match state and federal law. Many other cities in Ohio have adopted this language in the public accommodations section to reiterate how state and federal law would operate in practice. Only when religious entities enter the commercial sphere would they even be considered a public accommodation. Secondly, and more importantly, we completely oppose adding new and different language to the exemption that would essentially seek to remove all religious property uses from the NDO. Adding this language is an attempt to relitigate the original ordinance in the hours that this council spent listening to public policy considerations addressing this matter. Adding this new language would fundamentally change the public accommodation section, and we oppose any attempt to do so. Instead, the language changes offered in ordinance 2021-11 are technical and clarifying in nature. We do not oppose them and in fact agree that they make the language of the ordinance clear. Members of the Gulf Manor Council, we have spent years and hundreds of hours putting this ordinance in place for your village. Please do not substantially change it, and we look forward to the next step of implementing this for the village.
Thank you. All right, at this time, I'd ask if there's any other discussion among the council members.
So, if I may, attempt to have a discussion, which I feel like we haven't really had a frank discussion, an open discussion in the last 2 readings, for one reason or another. I did prepare something to say. I don't know how much I'll get through, but I think it's worthwhile at least having the discussion and trying to come to a consensus, if I may. So I think there's a little bit of confusion about what exactly the alternate language was being presented, which I could generally refer to as the Medina language in terms of the facilities. Right? I think I'm quoting that correctly. Terry, maybe correct me if I'm wrong.
You're talking about alternate 2?
The alternate 2, yeah. I think it's very clear that that the council is not interested in removing the exemption. I think I'm not sure I understand exactly what that's all about. But maybe we'll get there. Again, just trying to put things together. So obviously we heard from Terry, and I think it's a very important thing to reiterate that the intentionality of this ordinance has never been to attack anyone and never to put anyone on the spot and make anyone feel unwelcome or unwanted in Gulf Manor. I think that's extremely important to reiterate, and something that we, as a, whatever you want to call it, task force, the 3 gentlemen at the head table and myself, sat in these quarters, emphasizing that there is a certain level of trust and a certain level of understanding that the other people at the table are human beings who also want to be validated and appreciated and looked at as a person, a member of the Gulf Manor community who matters and should not be discriminated against. I think everybody is on the same page there. The language that I'm offering is pretty much, so again, getting back to the definition of commercial, right? We talked about the definition of commercial as commercial purpose or activity, which is open to a broader secular market other than members, families, or members, co-religious, religious denominational corporation, institution, association, organization. I apologize. I'm running on very little sleep and didn't really stop working today. So one concern that we had, which I spoke about with the mayor, is that definition of commercial is so broad that it includes things which are not monetary, because it doesn't say anything about money in that definition. Something that the mayor and I discussed, which I think when we boil down what exactly are we arguing about is, are we talking about your holy place, or are we talking about my dollar? Is my dollar good here, right? Am I able to come into your building and spend my dollar because it's the same dollars that you have in your pocket, right? Or is this your place? This is your special holy place that you consider is extremely special and important to you. I think at least boiling it down to that is something that we can do by sharpening the definition of commercial, which I don't know that we got to that. I mean, we spoke about it. I don't know that was presented to Terry, but I think it's something that is important to address. To add that language of commercial purpose or commercial activity is something which is monetary, right? I mean, that was something that I got to that clarity with Mr. Mayor last week, and, you know, without going into the history of how exactly we got there, you know, and taking a certain level of responsibility that we all are busy and that we all have things that come up, you know, the mayor and I really did try and come together and come to a consensus, come to clarity on some of these issues. So I think that was something that is at least worth looking at. In terms of the language of the actual place, whether we're talking about an exemption for a facility or not, you know, I think that before it was challenged, I think that it was basically a consensus that the Medina language was a compromise, right? And then once investigating it further and looking into it, and everybody, you know, kind of started to get defensive, and I take responsibility for that too. We started looking at it as if this was something that, well, you know, you can't give up anything, because once you give up something, you're giving into the other side and you're giving them that latitude. And I don't think that's acknowledging the other person who's sitting across from you. I don't think that acknowledges their humanity, right? That there was a certain level of consensus that we did come up with. I think actually I shouldn't say we at that point, because I don't know that I was on council at that point, but the council had come to at that point. And that was something that was considered a compromise. I do understand that has changed to a certain degree, and consensus may have changed there. But I at least ask that, from the perspective that if we are worried, I think one thing that the administrator had said very clearly is that in this is that I don't know if it was wrong. I apologize. I don't want to pin anything on any single person. I think one of the strongest arguments for setting up the Human Rights Commission is that when people say there has been no discrimination in Gulf Manor, that argument falls on deaf ears, because there has never been a body to hear said complaints, right? And therefore, to assume that such discrimination never happened in Gulf Manor is really quite short-sighted. And I happen to agree with that argument. I think that has a lot of merit. It makes a lot of sense. How in the world could we know if there was no official framework? But when it comes to the religious facilities, if we saw that there was a problem, if we saw that there was, and now that we have this framework, now that we have a committee that has to be appointed, it seems to me, and maybe this is my Talmudic training, is that when addressing law, the smallest change possible is generally the desired change, because we don't always understand to what extent that affects other people, right? We don't make broad stroke changes or broad stroke exemptions, so to speak, because we don't know how that's going to affect other people. But in the cases where it may affect other people, and yet we're still setting up a framework, we're setting up a place where people have that opportunity to speak, they can at least have that medium, and that can be heard. And if it was determined that this exemption on the facilities was inappropriate, then that could be revisited at a future time. So my request is that we at least consider the possibility that the person sitting across the table from us, right, or the people who are living down the street from us, don't have each other's negative, right? We don't have our bad intentions against each other. And I think that trust is a two-way street. And as much as I understand we want to protect everyone in Gulf Manor, and I think that is everyone's goal, I think that's what everybody wants, I think at the very least we owe them the benefit of the doubt and give them that chance. That if it was a problem, then of course you change it. Thank you.
Thank you. For the record, I want to say that Chief Campbell's placard and councilperson's private officer flip-flopped. Thank you, Councilman Prednoff. I appreciate your willingness to speak for us and your willingness to meet with me and all the council for all your work on this over the, how many years, more than 2 years that this has been worked on. Appreciate all your efforts, the communities, everyone here, making sure that voices are heard in the community. Is there a call for a vote?
There's been a first and a second.
First and a second. Is there any more discussion? All right, roll call.
Mr. Betcher,
Yes.
Ms. Cheney,
Yes.
Mr. Knipp,
Yes.
Mr. Pridnoff,
I'm sorry, I'm not 100% clear. We're voting on the language
Ordinance,
as it is.
there's no amendment
With
with
no
no on the table.
Then I would vote no.
Ms. Snyder.
Yes.
All right, that passes. Thank you, everyone. I want to say that when this passed council last year and then was sent to the voters and was passed by the voters, I had stated my intention to listen to whoever was had issues with this, that was concerned about it, to do my best to convey the good intentions of this ordinance and the good intentions of this council, that as we move forward with this commission, if we find any problems, we can always come back to this. All right. The commission is in place to help mediate problems. It's not a commission that jumps into finding people. The first step of that is, as our solicitor has spoken to, has been mediation all along. And will certainly be education for our council as we go.
And to Mr. Goodenoug's point, where you were saying pass the amendment and then revisit it, I think the message has always been pass this and we need to revisit it. This has never been carved in stone. And again, we can't think of all the exemptions and exceptions that may occur, but I think this is a community that's open-minded enough to pass this ordinance is also open-minded enough if there's a problem to revisit. Because it's the intent, it's a balance, respecting, as you say, both sides.
I appreciate your friendship and your working with me on getting greater clarification.
If the audience would like, we have some riveting appropriation ordinances you could stay through, or if you want to all exit at this point. Not that we don't want you to stay.
Okay. Do that again.
So the next item on the agenda is ordinance 2021-16. This deals with amending our appropriations. Do we have a motion to read by title only?
Motion made by title only.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
This is ordinance 2021-16, an ordinance to amend appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures of the Village of Gulf Manor for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2021. I need a motion to approve and a second.
Motion to approve.
Second.
This is what Mr. Lanzer discussed. It balances the books, basically. So we need a roll call.
Mr. Betcher,
Yes.
Ms. Cheney,
Yes.
Mr. Knipp,
Yes.
Mr. Pridnoff,
Yes.
Ms. Snyder,
Yes.
And I need a motion and a second to suspend the second and third readings. And a roll call vote.
Can the doors be closed or not?
This should be open.
Okay, I'm sorry, we'll leave it open.
I'm just here to work the door. It has to stay open. I don't make the rules.
So we need a motion, second, and a roll call vote on suspending the rules.
Norman.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
And then roll call.
Mr. Becher?
Yes.
Ms. Cheney?
Yes.
Mr. Cannett?
Yes.
Mr. Brittenhoff?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Next is ordinance 2021-17. Am I have a motion to read this by title only?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
So this is ordinance 2021-17, an ordinance to make appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures of the Village of Gulf Manor during the fiscal year ending December 31, 2022. We need a motion and a second.
So moved. Second.
All those,
This is the annual budget that Mr. Lanzer expressed and showed up here on the screen. This allows us to start spending money January 1, consistent with that budget. And we need a roll call vote.
Mr. Becher?
Yes.
Ms. Cheney?
Yes.
Mr. Cannett?
Yes.
Mr. Brittenhoff? Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
We need a motion to suspend the rules for second and third reading, and then a roll call vote.
Motion to suspend.
roll call.
Mr. Becher?
Yes.
Ms. Cheney?
Yes.
Mr. Cannett?
Yes.
Mr. Brittenhoff?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Next, we have ordinance number 2021-18. I have a motion to read by title only.
Motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Dolan, there was an endorsement from the Finance Committee to approve this ordinance.
Yeah, I'll go into that in discussion if there's any other comment too. By title, it's an ordinance amending section 131.08 of the Code of Ordinances entitled Overtime/Compensatory Time. We need a motion second, and we'll give you an explanation.
Motion. Second.
What this is 131.08 is our employees' benefits section specifically relative to overtime compensation. And I think this ordinance also picks up holiday pay, or holidays, which are defined, Juneteenth.
Juneteenth, yes.
The other thing we cleaned up in our holidays was acknowledging that it's for full-time employees. They get the holiday compensation, and we added Juneteenth to the roster of holidays. The other change was in 131.08 relative to overtime and compensatory time compensation. We make it clear, we've been in that practice for a number of times, but sometimes the frontline employees don't fully understand that hours worked is when you get your time and a half. If you work the 84 hours or 40 hours during your work period, and you take vacation time and you take sick time, those do not compound for time and a half. It's strictly hours worked is where the time and a half applies. So that was the first clarification. The other was, for a number of years, we've allowed compensatory time. Instead of writing you a check during that pay period, we allowed you to create a compensatory bank at time and a half. And then you would draw from that bank periodically when you wanted to take time off. At times, we were writing checks from that bank. We decided it's better if you work the time to pay you for the time, because the compensatory time bank is a ticking time bomb of liability. You could earn compensatory time when you're at this pay rate, and you get paid for it at that pay rate. So recognizing you should be paid when you work overtime, we've eliminated compensatory time. You will get paid during that pay period for time and a half work. Because a number of employees have that bank built up for cash management, we're going to buy that out during calendar year 2022 in quarterly increments. Mr. Earth mentioned that the Finance Committee's endorsed it. I think, Chief, you had said that the employees are on board with the compensatory time change.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they're on board with adding Juneteenth as a holiday.
Nobody.
Nobody complained about that. And Juneteenth is a date, I'm not understanding, I apologize. It's like December 25th. It's the same date every year. Is it the 18th?
19.
19th. So it's always June 19th will be Juneteenth. And that's consistent with where we're going with federal and state law as well.
I'm completely behind the times of the Juneteenth. If somebody could explain to me.
It was the date
Celebratory holiday.
in which the Union Army freed from bondage the last slaves in Texas.
Never had that definition, thank you.
And that's because of just the time it took to spread the message from Washington, D.C. to Texas.
Right, it was
The horse
after
can only
the
go
Civil
so fast.
Right. Right. We didn't have cell phones back then. We barely had telegraphs, so.
I've got internet and I've seen Juneteenth, but nobody ever explained it to me.
It's a specific date.
Sadie Hawkins Day or something, you know.
So is there any other explanation of those changes?
No, I think this will help us not have surprises at the end of the year when we have buyout from the employees. The other thing that we'll be looking at probably in January is how we handle vacation days. I gave a much greater explanation to the Finance Committee about what we're working on there. Chief Campbell and his staff are assisting with that analysis. And this will also help Mr. Lanzer in terms of formulating the budget in the future. So.
Oh, I think two other sections to mention. From time to time, our staff may get special assignments, marshal duty, OBI duty, where there's a third party providing compensation for time and a half to employees. What we're recognizing in here is if we assign to that detail and that time and a half is being paid by an outside agency, even though that might not qualify as time and a half under our payroll, you can't be paid that 1 1/2 times your hourly rate for that special detail. And then the last is we do have special details where construction company may hire a police department to do work. And so what we would do is approve that rate for paying the employee, and then whatever consumables would also go with it. So the chief would come with that rate and say, Strasser Construction has asked for 2 our employees, we're going to be paid this rate. Ron would sign off on some code for payroll. So it's just clarifying what we've done in practice anyway. Nothing else, we need a roll call vote.
Any questions or further discussion on it?
Mr. Betcher?
Yes.
Ms. Cheney?
Yes.
Mr. Knipp?
Yes.
Mr. Pridnoff?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
And we do not need to waive the second and third readings because it'll take place in 30 days, which will coincide with the January 1 start of those changes. The last is Resolution 2021-37. Need a motion to read by title only.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
This is a resolution authorizing the village administrator to accept an opioid settlement and to enter into the participation agreement with opioid manufacturers, Johnson & Johnson, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Inc., Ortho McNeil Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Inc., and Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Inc. And I need a motion to approve in a second, and I'll give you a brief explanation as to what this is.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Recall maybe about a year or so ago, we joined the One Ohio Negotiating Collaborative, where communities throughout the state of Ohio were joining the Attorney General to negotiate settlements of the opioid litigation, manufacturers, distributors, and so forth. About 2 months ago, we approved the settlement with the distributors. This is the settlement with the manufacturing group, which is Johnson & Johnson. They've asked that we approve it because part of the settlement is they have to achieve a certain percentage of participation before it becomes effective. So the AG's office is asking every community in Ohio to onboard and support it. We will not be receiving any direct dollars from this. With the One Ohio template that we approved, the monies through settlement are allocated principally to a foundation, which will be established by the state of Ohio, which will give grant money for abatement, education, and treatment. Those monies will be spread out and distributed through a network of regions that'll make application, like Tri-Health can make an application, or Talbot House can make an application. So we would not be receiving any direct compensation, nor would any of the large cities that were claiming millions and millions of dollars in overtime. So once we approve it, we're just checking the box that we're on board with that, and hopefully get the participation levels up. I don't know what is left relative to manufacturers or distributors. I do know that we are a creditor in the Purdue Pharma bankruptcy. Again, we approved that with the idea that those monies would come to the state of Ohio. So the governor's office, the AG's office, Municipal League have all asked that we endorse this. So this resolution will authorize Mr. Hurt to sign this participation agreement and allow us to upload it for acknowledging Gulf Manor has approved it. Questions? Then you roll call vote.
Mr. Butcher?
Yes.
Ms. Cheney?
Yes.
Mr. Knipp?
Yes.
Mr. Pridnoff?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Just a quick note, the fire board did approve our withdrawal last Wednesday night and approved the allocation agreement and has signed it. We've tendered that to the auditor, asking for immediate approval of that, with the idea that this will start switching over the tax collections in 2022 to Gulf Manor. We have no reason to believe they won't approve it. And the agreement itself said all the communities would endorse it and advocate for it. I sent it to the auditor's office last week with a request. They set up a conference call with Columbia Township, Fairfax, and me next week after the holiday to see if there's anything they want us to do specifically. And Dearborn Silverman signed the contract and did return it, so they're on the process of onboarding those 3 new employees to start service for us March 1. That's all I have.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Snyder, do you have a report for the executive committee?
Executive committee did not meet this evening.
Ms. Cheney, is there an education report?
Yeah, my turn before you. Okay, LSDMC met November the 10th. The big discussion that we're having is on the safety issues, starting and quitting times at PRM. That's going to be ongoing for a while. We discussed whether a pedestrian scramble crosswalk might help.
What, yeah?
I know, you knew somebody's going to ask me that. The pictures I've seen of them, it looks like the crosswalks go in all directions. Around, like that's at a four-way area.
Like Tokyo.
Hmm?
You usually see it at the big intersections like Tokyo and some of the bigger cities.
Yeah, the bigger intersections, yeah. So I don't really know how that would work up there, because I thought it was just one crosswalk coming across the street. But anyway, Pleasant Ridge Community Council is going to be working on, oh, you looking it up for us?
There it is.
There you go.
It stops all traffic in all directions.
That's all, looks like a big X for where you're gonna get hit.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it stops traffic, right. Supposed
Don't be the
to.
guy stop there in the center. Do not tie your shoe here.
They also talked about maybe putting the speed bumps in that area to slow people down. Anyway, Pleasant Ridge Community Council is going to be working on that too. We're also asking parents and concerned citizens to write to CPS board with their concerns about this too. Just so you know, the district already pays for one officer to be there. It costs $16,000 a year. It's currently covered by a grant though. So at this time, we do not have any additional monies to have any more officers there. So we have ongoing discussions. Oh, and what just came up was Lindsay Felder. I don't know her. She's a PRM parent. She's taking the lead on this, and she's getting a group together to brainstorm what can do. I have her email address if anybody's interested. I'm also now serving on another PRM LSDMC committee. We're discussing creative solutions for enrollment. Right now we have 700, we're back to 719 students. And I don't have the plans yet for the addition that's going to be built. It's not finalized either, probably till April. But I'm waiting for it to come. But it's going to be 3 floors on the one side. And we're told that we'll have 3 rooms left over for growth. So that was good news. But as PRM is growing fast, I worry about Gulf Manor is what I told them, because all the new people moving in. And they're concerned about Pleasant Ridge people too. So in this new committee, the board, the CPS board, is also discussing creative solutions for enrollment, because they have quite a few schools that are not capacity. They have a lot of openings. And then they have other schools that are over capacity. So they're working to figure out, well, first they're going to get a list of all the schools that they have and what the capacity is and what the enrollment is. And then they'll go from there. So we're already starting our committee just to talk about what's possible. You know, what we think, or what the parents in this meeting think, is that when you move into a neighborhood, maybe you don't know what schools are in your area. Like we have Woodford and we have Silverton, which are options too for kids. And maybe people need to be educated. Maybe instead of just thinking that because you move to Gulf Manor or Pleasant Ridge or whatever, that this is the best school for your kid. You know, so there's just a lot of discussions are going to have to go on, and I'm sure the board's going to be handling most of this and go from there. They also talked about, well, maybe we need to go back to the neighborhood school, you know, and not transport kids. And now you've heard that the bus service isn't going to happen next year. And maybe it's time to discuss this instead of transporting kids across town, keeping them more in their area. So there's a lot of discussions going to take place. But I did listen to one of the meetings that the board had, it's one of their committees, and they were talking, this was the end of October's meeting, and they were talking about how to get the 7th and 8th graders to school because Metro dropping them. So they're talking about doing a pilot program at Clark Montessori and Schroeder, where they would hire yellow buses to take kids, just to try it out. The cost of one yellow bus, $450 to transport. I thought that was a lot of money, unless you have a lot of kids on it. I can't remember the total for the year. It's like $45,000 a year it would cost them, you know, to get these kids to school. And there's 4 bus services around. I thought this was interesting too. Is it First Student? They have the best percentage rate of getting kids to school on time. I never even thought kids would get to school late on a bus. But yeah, and there's only one bus service, and I can't remember the name of it, that is even available right now that has the capacity to try this pilot program. So stay tuned. We're going to find out more about what's going to happen with busing. And you know what really upsets me too is we passed that sales tax where it's supposed to benefit sorta and the bus service and give better buses, and now we're getting worse. To me, it looks like we're getting worse instead. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussions going on.
Are the yellow bus companies, are they private or are they government run?
Private.
Mhm. Yes, that would explain it.
Some districts have their own, but most of them are privately operated.
That's what I thought. So that would answer your question, why the sort of money isn't affecting the yellow buses.
No, not the yellow buses. They have the Metro buses that take kids to school.
Oh.
Yeah, and they canceled a lot of those this year because they didn't have employees to drive the buses.
Yeah,
That's
so
what
a
they're
lot of
saying.
advertising from drivers.
Mhm. Yeah,
Makes
so
sense.
we'll see where that goes. Great. I would like to thank Atlantic Foods. They donated food to PRM for their Thanksgiving boxes this year that they handed out to people. I thought that was really nice to hear a Gulf Manor business mentioned. And here's something I'm going to tell you that's interesting. In this meeting, Ryan Messer is on this committee, and it's the Budget Committee and Growth Committee. And he said he received a letter from a Cincinnati resident complaining about the high school taxes. He said that the letter, he got a phone call. Originally, the city of Cincinnati was contacted by this person complaining about the taxes being so high. And the Cincinnati councilman, and he didn't mention a name, said that it's because of the school taxes. So contact the board. So this person contacted Ryan Messer. So Ryan Messer said to him, one of the main problems is that the city of Cincinnati continues to give tax abatements for 12 to 15 years. And that hurts the school system because they don't get taxes in based on that. And then when you don't get taxes based on that, that property, the people that are already paying taxes ended up, they end up asking those people for more money when other people aren't paying for it. So that was interesting because Kimberly Hughes, and I don't know who she is, but she put up a document, and there's 7 projects right now in Hamilton County that are going on. And the tax abatements are anywhere from 8 years to 15 years. And if you break down the cost of this, a year, it's $116,400. But when I took 40% of that, which would go to the schools, the CPS schools, on just 7 properties, that's $50,000 a year. That the school system's not gonna get, for any new kids that'll come in. So I thought that was very interesting, because we tell people, it is the Cincinnati schools that are costing all the residents such high taxes, even here. But all these tax abatements are out there. So what the school board, Ryan Messer asked for, and Ian Bolton, is that they're going to contact the city of Cincinnati, and they're going to ask them for a list of all the tax abatements that they're given and the dollar value. And they want to know what they're losing, so they can go from there with it. So I thought that was great. And one more thing, maybe. Nope, I think I covered it. I did it.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Cheney, and thank you for your increased involvement and communications with the school board through the committee that you've gotten involved with. I know in my conversations with CPS that one of the things that they're looking at, one of the big problems that people seem to all be agreed upon, is how poor the communication has been between residents and CPS schools and their board. So they're seeing that as a high priority to make sure that those communication lines are improved. And I see that as part of what you're involved in. So
attending one of those meetings is a 2-hour, 3-hour meeting.
And therein can be part of the
This one was
problem.
an hour and 15 minutes.
Hey, but we have an end with Mary Weinberg now. so-
Yes,
There we go.
that's really good. And she was a resident here for 26 years.
Yeah.
She came down here.
We have a nice room back there where they can hold a board meeting.
I know. I think that'll be really good for us.
Yeah.
To have somebody from Gulf Manor on the board.
Agreed. And as I said, I think we can probably maybe increase our hand in that with doing some projects to brag on her residency
Yeah, I
here,
think that's good.
And,
I know. Mhm.
her being a gold medal Olympian.
Mhm.
Very good. Well, thank you for your report. Mr. Pridenoff, is there any nonprofit report?
No report.
All right. Roger's not here. Mr. Lancer, are you able to speak to the fire
Yeah.
district board?
Yes, I am. It's listed on there that the next Little Miami Fire Board meeting will be Wednesday, December 15th at 6 p.m. It's listed on Fairfax. It will not be at Fairfax. It's going to be at the new Columbia Township Administration Building, which is the old Madison Place Firehouse. They're doing significant renovations there. The fire district has made a new hire for a chief. His name is Mike Sifke. He was the assistant chief for Whitewater Township over on the west side of town. His first shift was today, actually. So hopefully we can get him in soon to at least introduce himself. I think y'all would like it. The only other thing is there's a working group that's working with the union on their new CBA. We hope to get that, hopefully, to be approved at the next board meeting on December 15th. And the report.
Thank you, Mr. Lancer. Planning Commission, Mr. Betcher.
No reports. Will be no meeting on Monday, December 6th. The next scheduled planning commission will be Monday, January 3rd, the new year, 6 p.m.
Good, thank you. Mr. Knipp, community engagement?
No report, but I need to talk to Mr. Ron before he leaves.
Good. Finance Committee, Mr. Betcher.
Yeah. Finance Committee met this evening. I think Mr. Lancer covered the majority of it. We did have an executive session to discuss a couple items. I think we're discussing that with some recommendations from finance tonight. The one thing that was not in the executive session that was discussed, so we can discuss it, was the participation in some police programs that we're going to love to continue into 2022 and further discussion around that. So, end of report. See everybody for finance in 2022. That was the last one of the year.
Very good. I'm going to go ahead and read some, well, what do you think? Should I go ahead and do announcements?
Yeah, we will come back.
Okay. So announcements, the next meeting of council will be Monday, December 13th, 2021. Council members elected on November 2nd will be seated along with the organization of the new council. Friends, families, general public are welcome to attend. The evening will conclude with a reception. After that, the next council meetings are scheduled for Monday, January 10th, as follows: Executive Committee at 6 p.m. and Council at 7 p.m. Any other announcements? Is
Happy
there-
Thanksgiving.
Very good.
And we need a motion then to adjourn to executive session to discuss public employee compensation.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Betcher,
Yes.
Ms. Cheney,
Yes.
Mr. Knipp,
Yes.
Mr. Pridnoff,
Yes.
Ms. Snyder.
Yes.
For those watching, what this means is we're going to be moving into executive session, which means only the council members will be present. We're going to stop the live feed, and we will return for adjournment after we are done with executive session.
And we anticipate we may have another piece of legislation then added to the agenda when we come back to regular session before we adjourn completely.
As stated.
It's like you want to select, you gotta pick which, you gonna do the